Primary arms must like the way I do my reviews, because they just keep on sending me stuff, despite the fact that some of the reviews aren't as glowing as they might want them to be. That's because I give you guys, that's you the viewer, the most honest possible information I can about what I'm reviewing. Regardless, a huge thank you to Primary Arms for not only sending these in for me to review, but also caring enough about what I think about their products, even if it isn't a 100% full glowing review. These are brand new, or at least going to be brand new. So much so that at the time of this filming, I'm not supposed to make these public yet. In fact, this is the sheet that they gave me. And as you can clearly see, don't make public until 1/9/23. It is currently the 6th of January, but by the time this review finally hits the streets, it's probably going to be sometime in February. That is a multi-part problem that I have, which is just, well, really a lot going on. But there's a lot of useful information on this, which I will implore you to pause the video and take a quick look. And with a suggested price of $200, it's not that much money. But if anything is to be expected from the SLX MD-25, which, by the way, we've already taken a quick look at a while ago, these things are going to be closer to like the low 150s and below. Now, these are both the same with the exception of the reticles. One is clearly a standard 2MOA dot. Let me do that. And the other is the ACSS CQB. As far as how to use the CQB reticle, or at least how they recommend it, this is the BDC compensation for particular cartridges using this reticle. So if you want to use this with basically most of the really common calibers, you'll have at least a very good starting point of where your zero should be and what the drops will represent. So kudos, Primary Arms. Now, because these are identical with the exception of the reticle, I'm only going to open up one box at a time. The box on this is very nice. All your basic information is going to be on the sides. And again, I implore you, pause this and really go over it if you're really interested. Inside the box, we're going to have our owner's manual, which should be pretty simple because there isn't a whole lot going on. This is basically just a red dot that is motion sensitive, so it has auto off. That's all you're going to really need to know. If you don't like Primary Arms with the products that they produce, at least appreciate them for including thread locker in every single box that they ever put out. Going over the actual owner's manual real quick, you can see you have a plethora of different base options that come included in this setup, so this way you can get the height hopefully perfect for what you're looking for. There's the section on their auto off and your acclaimed battery life. It says up to 50,000 hours with a 2MOA dot, or 12,000 hours with the ACSS reticle, which is what we have in front of us right now. Click values are half MOA, which is honestly perfect. 11 total brightness settings with 2 of them for night vision capabilities. It's honestly a lot easier just to pull everything out of the box and go over it. You have a large torque driver for the main base, an Allen key for everything else, different length and doubles of screws for the different bases. It comes set up with the higher base. It also includes the low mount, which is set up for aimpoint T1H1, so you can swap this out with any number of QD mounts that are out there on the market. And of course, the different spacers, so you can mix and match to get the height just where you need it. Now, this wouldn't be a review of mine if I didn't measure the weight and compare it against other options. This thing, with the higher mount, comes in at 7.3 ounces. Of course, if you're adding different spacers, it'll increase the weight ever so slightly, but still probably keep it under 8 ounces. StrikeFire 2 from Vortex comes in significantly heavier than that. The Holosun 512. And the Promethean LP1 comes in, again, at a fairly significantly higher weight. Starting at the back, we're going to take a look at how the glass looks on this thing. And you can see we have a little bit of tinting going on the right side hemisphere. We also see some of that red reflective tint from the front, from the rear, but mostly the front reflecting back at us. That's just something that's going to be there. But we do have a very large window looking through this. Compare this to the Vortex StrikeFire 2. It is a much larger looking window. But as you can see, the color palette between these two are totally different. Also, the StrikeFire 2 body is just monstrous by comparison and significantly heavier. But as far as the window size go, you can see that the MD-25 is a little bit larger. Moving on to the illumination control and the battery compartment, you're going to see we actually have 2, 4, 6, 8 fingers holding the battery in, and a big rubber pad on the back. This does require a tool to remove the battery because the battery is so well held in place, you have to use something to remove it. 3 dimples underneath it puts positive pressure on that battery at all times. You heard that very satisfying click. One thing that I did complain about with, I believe it was the SLX micro prism, the 1X, was the divot on this, or the relief cut, is a little bit too wide and a little bit too shallow. So when you put a coin in there, you see how much room we have? There's a little bit too much, and you got to really be careful turning this, because if not, it'll pop out and it could damage the groove. So there's 11 brightness settings in total, 2 of which are night vision, and there's only 1 off, which is not a big deal. Detent on this, again similar to what we felt with the SLX micro prism, is just a little bit shallow. You know that it's falling in, but it's not snapping into place. I would like to see that be changed a little bit, but just be mindful that when you do turn this on, it goes right where you want it and not off a little bit, because it might be on, but it also might just kick itself down to another brightness setting that isn't going to be perfect for you. So something to take note of. Just be mindful when you adjust this thing. As far as the turrets themselves, we already know from the instruction manual, these are 1/2-inch clicks. We have a big old O-ring at the base, so this way when we put the caps on, we have good positive interference between the O-ring and the cap to prevent any water egress. And both caps feature a tool to adjust your windage and elevation. Very good sound and feel. You know exactly when you're skipping a detent. So adjusting this should be very easy. It's got a really good sound, but when you're on the range, it's sometimes very hard to hear what's going on, particularly because you're probably wearing ear pro and guns might be going off around you. But if you can't hear it, you can very easily feel and count that. Excellent. The last thing to showcase is just at the extreme level at which this front glass is. It's off to a very far angle, and that is because the emitter, if we look through the front, is right there. And if we turn it on, yep, I went the right way, you can clearly see it right there. So the reason why this glass is tilted is that it is perfectly perpendicular with how the LED is emitting the reticle. And when we look through it from the back, it should be nice and round. It shouldn't be oblong or blurry or anything like that. It should be a beautiful, crisp reticle. And so far, it's looking pretty good. But enough talking about it. Let's get behind this thing and its little brother, the 2MOA red dot, and see how well they actually work. Better late than never, I always say, and even though I expected this to come out sometime at the very beginning of the year, it's already the beginning of April. On the left, you're going to have the 2MOA dot. On the right, you're going to have the ACSS throughout the majority of this video to give you guys a much better representation of what you're looking at. But truth be told, they're basically identical with the exception of the reticle. However, not both reticles work the same. That didn't sound right, but just know that the 2MOA dot doesn't seem as sharp, clear, or as easily magnified as the ACSS reticle. There's a lot more bleed out with it, and it seems like it has a lot more tearing as well. I showed you just how tilted the front lens is, and I really would have thought the ACSS would have suffered more than the 2MOA dot. As far as the tint to the right side of the image, you're going to see a little bit more of that. And as far as the shake awake, just know that it does work actually quite well. It takes a good bit of force to turn it on, so you don't have to worry about this thing accidentally getting bumped on all the time. Now, I did review the early generation MD-25 or the SLX compact red dot about 10 months ago. And the only thing that's changed between that and this is basically the introduction of the shake awake. That one also had an ACSS reticle. I'm not 100% sure if they changed a lot of the dynamics of how the ACSS reticle is set up, but they're basically the same. The biggest takeaway I had with it before was it's big and chonky, and as you can see, you see a lot of the scope body. The 25 basically represents the view looking through it being 25mm as opposed to a typical 24.
Pew! 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 Pew!
I run these red dots side by side, so this way you get a better understanding of how the reticle is going to work and if it's going to work right for you in a certain situation.
Pew! Pew! Pew pew! Pew!
Some red dots do have a hard time when it comes to magnification, but these being 25mm view through it means that when you throw a magnifier behind them like you do with this HM3X, you have a beautiful view looking through it. However, the magnifier does magnify that blue tint off to the side, which isn't ideal.
Pew! 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 Pew!
Now, if you are concerned about the overall size of the body on this thing, I completely get it. It is rather large, and it does block a good bit of your view through your shooting eye, but you should be training with red dots, or rather any optic for that matter, to be shooting truly with both eyes open to help mitigate that being a problem.
Pew! Pew!
And if you plan to magnify it, it's a non-issue.
Pew pew! Pew!
But down here isn't the best place to showcase its weaknesses, so let's finish up down here and get into some daylight.
Pew pew! Pew! Pew pew pew! Pew 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 pew!
Ah, that's much better. We have a nice bright sunny day focusing our attention at our 400-yard brick building. When I'm doing a single segment like this, we're going to be starting with the 2MOA dot and working our way towards the ACSS. Here with a 2x crop, you can see that the body on this thing is gigantic, and it actually makes the view through it seem smaller than what it really is, which is kind of upsetting. Again though, both eyes should be open. And again though, the price on these things is fairly cheap. In fact, right now, as of 4/6/23, you can buy these direct from Primary Arms for about $140, which is pretty affordable, all things considered. I will be rolling in some comparisons soon, but for right now, let's see how well this thing handles the brighter environment that we're currently in, as well as see if there's any distortion across these power lines. Truth be told, despite how tilted the front lens is, there isn't that much distortion, if any. The only real imperfection that really stands out to me is that blue tint. So with that, let's magnify these two and see if it gets even worse under magnification. With a controlled swing of the Holosun HM3X, bringing both of these up at the exact same position, you can see that the tint is very visible. In fact, it seems more visible in the ACSS reticle than it does with the regular 2MOA dot. And as previously mentioned, the ACSS reticle seems a lot sharper to my eye as opposed to 2MOA dot. I did try to adjust the diopter on the magnifier a little bit, but it really doesn't make much of a difference. Now, I can't say for sure if the tint is intentional or not, or if it's just a byproduct of the red anti-reflector on the front, but the glass is sharp. It does have some tint, but it is still clear, meaning that there is no real distortion to the image. There's no blurriness, there's no fisheye or pincushion. It's good, clear glass, despite the fact it's got a lot of tint. And the contrast is still pretty decent despite how much darker the image is because of that tint. To help showcase that the glass is pretty good and the image remains flat, I flip over the magnifier and we're going to pan the camera side to side. If you take note of the tint, it sort of follows the reticle around a little bit, but the reticle still remains pretty round and mostly in shape. So that's a testament to show that everything is lined up, at least on this ACSS reticle, as well as it could be. I think now is a good time to roll into its first main competitor, or at least a competitor that I've reviewed fairly recently, and that's going to be the Holosun 403B. This is a 2MOA version, and it does not have the solar panel. As a result of that, these are roughly the exact same price, about $139 for the MD-25 on the left, either the 2MOA dot or the ACSS version. But for the 403B, it only comes with the 2MOA dot for about $148. Yes, you can get it with an ACSS. Yes, you can get it with their dot and circle reticles, but they are going to be more expensive. You can also get the Holosuns with a solar panel, but again, it'll be more expensive, at least $40 to $50 more expensive. In fact, you can buy this 403 with an ACSS from Primary Arms for about $250. Is it worth an extra $110? Well, that's for you to decide. Ultimately, it's up to you if you really, really, really want the ACSS reticle or not. If you're fine with just a dot, your options are much wider. However, clearly there is a performance difference between these two. If we're looking at just the glass clarity, there is a complete night and day difference. The Holosun absolutely is crystal clear with excellent colors, contrast, you name it. Whereas the MD-25 is almost the exact opposite. Despite the fact it is clear, it just doesn't have the vibrancy and life as the 403. Now, truth be told, these were filmed on two fairly separate days, but the fact still remains, the 403 is much smaller, lighter, and clearer. And unfortunately, shortcomings don't end there with the MD-25. When we start looking at this thing in a much darker environment, even darker than the garage, the tint becomes much more apparent. Focusing our attention on the overcast sky, the tint really becomes the focal point of our talking point here. It is unmistakably darker than it has been in any other environment. I can't really give you much more information than that, other than
it gets really, really bad. And when we magnify it, as you'll see here in a second, it only makes things worse. Now, as far as the illumination brightness on both of these go, they both get to insanely, insanely bright levels. Truly, truly daytime bright and beyond. They actually are too bright, but I'd rather it be too bright and be able to just dial it down than the exact opposite and not be able to get it bright enough. I always found with the ACSS, though, you could find the perfect brightness, as opposed to with the dot, it's a little bit harder to get that exact brightness where I feel perfectly comfortable in that particular environment that I was currently in. Now, yes, it is easily fixed by a quick turn of the rotary dial on the left-hand side, but your mileage may vary. I think it just has a lot to do with the overall size of the reticle and your environment. Moving on to the 50-yard line at my small bore range, we're going to play around with this thing, just looking through it in a dynamic roll before we roll in some more competitors. Again, it's not bad, and the reticle doesn't seem to be shifting all that much, if at all. But the tint, however, is still more noticeable on the right-hand side than it is on the left, at least here in our current environment, which is a slightly cloudy, slightly sunny day. The main thing we're looking for here, though, is to see if the reticle is going to shift if you're off at a really steep angle. And happily, neither the 2MOI dot or the ACSS version here does that. The reticle stays exactly where we're pointed, and that's really nice, because if you decide you want to run this in a dynamic environment, you have nothing to worry about as far as the reticle being shifted and you possibly missing a shot. Let's roll in some side-by-side comparisons with some competitors before I get into my final thoughts. And the next one up is going to be one of its cousins, the Primary Arms Micro SLX 1X Prism. Now, if you're going to be running this magnified, I don't recommend it, but if you have a slight astigmatism, it's well worth the near double price point. These are around $269, $270, and it absolutely is a better option, especially if you're unsure if the reticle is going to be sharp to your eye. Now, it only really works if you're going to run it unmagnified. Yes, you can run it with a magnifier behind it, but you'd have to shift it typically a little bit farther forward, and you might be just outside the eye box. However, I highly recommend it. It's permanently mounted on my Ruger PCC, and it's never coming off. Next up is a blast from the past, from my Gen 1 recording rig days, literally like 5+ years ago at this point. I brought it out on the tabletop to showcase its weight. It is the Vortex StrikeFire 2. Now, yeah, this is really old footage, but it's going to give us a couple of key points still. 1, the glass has no tint. 2, the reticle is still pretty good, but 3, the body on it is gigantic, significantly larger than what the MD-25 is here. And they also cost about $50 to $60 more. Typically, you could find these for around the $200 price point, but you can find them on sale for like the 160s or so. So honestly, pretty close to the MD-25, but it's a much larger, much heavier, and a little bit more, how should I say, archaic red dot. However, they are pretty robust, and if you are building a clone rifle and you want to mimic an aim point, they're the one you have to get. So with that, let's get into my final thoughts real briefly. Now, to be brutally honest and as transparent as can be, yes, Primary Arms sent these in for me to keep and review. No, I did not promise them I'd give them a good review. I am loyal to you guys, my fans, my viewers. Without you, I am nothing. So I have to put you guys first, even if a company is not going to be happy with what I have to say about their product. And I've showcased that in a couple of different comparisons here, that these do have their shortcomings, they do have their flaws. But they are still a fairly well-priced, fairly well-optioned, and fairly well-robust red dot. I've lent these out to a lot of people to run and abuse, and no one's had any problems with them. Everything just seems to work quite well. As far as zeroing, nothing has been a problem. As far as the overall brightness, again, that hasn't been a problem. And if something does become a problem, you're at least backed with Primary Arms' warranty. Do I ultimately recommend them? It's up to you. I personally don't have any uses for them, but if it was up to me, I'd probably run something a little bit different, maybe with a little bit larger window and a smaller profile, because the body does get really big really fast, and it does become a little tiring after a while. However, if you're on a budget and you like what this thing offers, then I think it's a pretty decent buy. But there are other options out there for you guys, so broaden your horizons a little bit and see what's out there. With all of that being said, a big thank you to Primary Arms for sending these in for me to review. I truly appreciate it. But ultimately, thank you all very much for watching, my fans, because again, without you, I wouldn't be here. So, thank you all very much, And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my SubscribeStar subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.